My 29th Thanksgiving started the way most of mine did, with a casserole dish I had driven 40 minutes to bring, and a table that had already assigned me the seat closest to the kitchen, farthest from the conversation. My mother had spent 3 days decorating. Cloth napkins folded into swans, candles in little glass holders she had ordered from a home decor catalog, a centerpiece of fake autumn leaves arranged around a gourd she had spray-painted gold. My brother had walked in 20 minutes late with a bottle of grocery store wine and received a standing ovation. I had been there since 10 in the morning helping peel sweet potatoes, and when I set the casserole down, my mother looked at it the way you look at a piece of furniture that arrived in the wrong color. I almost made it through the whole meal without incident. Almost. We were somewhere between the second round of turkey and the pie when my father pushed back from the table slightly, the way he does when he wants the room to know something important is coming, and pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his blazer. "We've been meaning to give you this for a while," he said. "Your mother and I put it together. We thought you should have it before the holidays." My brother looked at his phone. My aunt smiled like she already knew. My mother reached over and straightened her fork even though it was already straight. I opened the envelope. Inside was a document. 3 pages, printed, stapled. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Family investment, summary Ellie's portion." Below that was a table. Itemized. 18 years of birthdays, school supplies, a broken retainer I had lost in 7th grade, the 1 semester of community college I had attended before withdrawing, a coat they had bought me the winter I was 16, and a line item that simply said general upkeep, estimated with a figure next to it that made my vision go briefly white. The total at the bottom was $47,000. My father leaned forward. "We're not asking you to pay it all at once." My brother laughed under his breath. My aunt refilled her wine glass. My mother looked at the centerpiece instead of at me. I sat with that paper in my hands, and I heard the sound the table made when my brother put his elbow on it. I heard the candles. I heard my own breathing. I did not cry, not because it didn't land, but because somewhere beneath the shock, something had finally finished breaking, and broken things don't make noise anymore. They just become a different shape. "Interesting," I said. Then I folded the document in thirds, slid it back into the envelope, and put the envelope in my purse. My father looked surprised. He had expected either tears or a fight, both of which he could have used. My stillness had no utility for him, so he defaulted to explaining. "We just want you to understand the investment we made. Your brother understands it. He contributes to this family." My brother, to his credit, at least had the decency to look at the tablecloth. I stood up, excused myself politely, and helped clear 2 plates before picking up my keys. I thanked my mother for the meal. She grabbed my wrist in the kitchen doorway, her voice dropping to the hiss she reserved for disagreements she didn't want witnesses to. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "It's just a conversation starter." I looked at her hand on my wrist. Then I looked at her face. "A conversation," I said, "usually has 2 sides." I drove home in the dark on I-10, with the heat on and the radio off, and $47,000 pressing against the inside of my purse like a verdict somebody had been drafting for years. My name is Ellie Marsh, and I am an industrial electrician working commercial and infrastructure contracts in the greater Houston area. I wire distribution panels for warehouses. I troubleshoot power failures at water treatment facilities at 2 in the morning. I pull permits, read blueprints, and work in substations where a moment of inattention costs more than money. My hands are rough, and my schedule is strange, and I have spent most of my adult life watching people assume I couldn't possibly be doing well for myself because I didn't carry a laptop bag or work in an office with a view. My family had always treated my career the way people treat a phase, something you endure until the person comes to their senses. My brother was a regional sales manager for a medical device company. He wore polos and talked about pipelines at dinner, and my parents displayed his business card on the refrigerator like a trophy. I had a journeyman electrician's license, a master electrician certification. I had passed on my first attempt, and for the last 2 years, I had been quietly sending 20% of every paycheck to a savings account my family knew nothing about. 4 months before that Thanksgiving, I had closed on a 2-bedroom condo in Midtown Houston, ground floor was mine. I rented the unit above me to a woman named Deb, who was a nurse and never complained, and kept her own schedule as irregular as mine. The building was solid, newer construction, 12 feet of elevation above the floodplain. I had chosen it carefully. I had chosen everything about it carefully, because in the house I grew up in, information was currency, and I had learned early that letting my family know what I had was the same as letting them decide how to spend it. I told almost no one about the condo. My coworker and closest friend Renata knew, because Renata had driven the moving truck and helped me assemble a couch at midnight while eating bad pizza and laughing about load calculations. My immediate supervisor knew I had bought a place. That was the full list. I drove home to my own condo that Thanksgiving night, and sat on the couch I had assembled myself, and read the itemized invoice one more time by lamplight. The coat from 1,998. The broken retainer. General upkeep. Estimated. I thought about the years I had spent quietly absorbing the jokes about my work boots at Christmas dinner. The comments about how I must not be very smart if I was crawling through ceiling panels. The way my mother had once told a family friend, in front of me, that I was still figuring things out. I had been 26 years old and already held a license that took most people years to earn. I took a photo of every page. I emailed the images to myself. Then I went to sleep, because I had a 7 a.m. job site call, and the world did not pause its power failures for other people's family drama. The weeks after Thanksgiving were quiet in the specific way that silence gets when something has already been said. My mother sent one text that read, "Just making sure you got home okay." My father called once from his cell and left a voicemail about how these conversations were necessary for mature adults. My brother texted me a meme, which was his version of a peace offering. I did not respond to any of them. Not out of cruelty. I was just finally applying the same principle I used in my work. Before you touch a live circuit, you disconnect the power source. Now, before I tell you what happened next and why I was standing at my front door at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in late August, with my hand on the deadbolt and someone I loved very much pounding on the other side of it, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to know who else is awake for the part that changed everything. Renata had been my closest friend since we met in the apprenticeship program 8 years ago. She was the kind of person who noticed everything and said half of it and meant all of it. She was also the only person who had ever heard my full family history start to finish and responded not with advice or outrage but with, "Yeah, that tracks. You want another coffee? Or are we done processing for tonight?" She had a way of making hard things feel survivable without pretending they weren't hard. She was the one who called me in late July to say she had seen my brother post something on social media. A photo of my parents' house. His caption mentioned storm prep. The tropical weather system that had been organizing in the Gulf for 5 days had just been upgraded overnight. I already knew. I had been watching the forecast the way you watch something that is moving towards someone you cannot stop caring about regardless of what they've done to you. My parents' house sat in a neighborhood built in the 70s on a stretch of ground that flooded in heavy rain, let alone a named storm. They had rejected flood insurance twice because my father believed the premiums were a scam. He had said this at 2 separate family dinners, with confidence, as if certainty was the same thing as protection. I called my mother once, the morning the storm was 2 days out, to say, "You should go to my aunt's place in San Antonio. She is higher and drier. Leave now." My mother said, "We'll be fine. Your father says it's going to turn north." I said, "The forecast says it won't." She said, "Well, your father has lived here for 35 years. I said, "I know. Please leave." She said she would think about it. They did not leave. The storm made landfall on a Tuesday. I had secured everything at my property 2 days prior, moved Deb's car to the upper deck of a covered garage, checked my own roof and drainage, and coordinated with my supervisor about the post-storm infrastructure contracts that would start the moment the wind died down. Then I sat with Renata in her house on high ground and watched the radar move over our city like something inevitable. By the time the rain stopped, my parents' street had between 3 and 4 feet of standing water. I knew this because my aunt, who had evacuated to San Antonio exactly as I had suggested, was receiving updates from a neighbor with a kayak. The house had taken on water. The cars were flooded. My father had apparently refused to turn off the breakers before the water reached them, because he had waited too long to believe it was real. Nobody called to tell me any of this directly. I found out the same way I found out about most things in my family, through the edge of other conversations, through a text from my aunt that was meant to be informational and managed to be both that and an accidental confession. She wrote, "They're okay, but the house is a mess and I think they're trying to find somewhere to go. Did you know you own a condo now? Your mom mentioned it." I didn't know. I read that sentence 3 times. Your mom mentioned it. I sat with that for a moment. Then I thought about who else she might have mentioned it to, and when, and why it had never come up in any conversation directed at me. Renata read it over my shoulder and said nothing for a beat. Then she said, "So they knew." I nodded. "And they never said anything?" "No." "So they were saving it," she said. "Yes, I thought so too. People who catalog information about you are not doing it out of love. They are building leverage for a moment they have not yet decided to use." That moment, it turned out, was a Tuesday night in late August, when the standing water was still 3 feet deep on their street, and their options had become specific and few. The first text came from my brother at 9:45. "Hey, do you have room?" I did not respond. At 10:15, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She said they needed a place for a few nights. The house was not livable. They didn't want to impose. She used the word impose twice, which meant she did not actually believe she was imposing, she just wanted credit for saying the word. At 11:03, my father called from a number I didn't recognize. It rang through. At 11:27, the pounding started. I want to be careful here about what I mean when I say pounding, because that word can imply panic, and what I heard initially was not panic. It was entitlement in physical form. It was the knock of a person who has never genuinely believed a door would not open for them. 3 hard beats, then my mother's voice. "Ellie, we know you're home. Your truck is outside." I was standing in my kitchen in sweatpants with a glass of water, and I went completely still the way you go, still in a dark room when you're not sure what the sound was. I moved to the front window. The curtain had a gap at the edge, and I looked through it without touching it. My mother was standing on my porch in a rain jacket that was still damp, her hair pulled back unevenly. My father was behind her in a flannel shirt with a duffel bag at his feet. My brother was on the step below them, car keys in his hand, looking at his phone. And on the walkway behind all of them was my sister-in-law, holding their daughter, my 3-year-old niece, who was asleep against her shoulder with one small hand curled up near her own chin. Something moved in my chest when I saw my niece. I will not pretend it didn't. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably 15 seconds. Long enough for me to feel several things at once: the pull of old obligation, the exhaustion of it, the grief of a family that had made itself impossible to help without also making yourself impossible to protect. Long enough to remember the invoice on the dining table. The hissed "don't be dramatic" in the kitchen doorway. Your mom mentioned it. They had known about my condo for some time, and had said nothing to me and saved it, like a card they were holding for a hand worth playing. I unlocked the outer screen door, but kept the main door closed, and opened it only to the width of a conversation. "What happened?" I said. My mother's face did something complicated. She had prepared, I think, for either a fight or an immediate invitation inside, and a calm question from a cracked door was not in her script. "The house flooded. We didn't have anywhere. I called you 2 days ago," I said. "I told you to go to Aunt Carol's." My father cleared his throat. "We made a judgment call." "I know," I said. "You always do." He didn't have a quick answer for that, which was unusual for him. My mother stepped forward. "Ellie baby, it's late. We've been through something tonight. Can we please just come in and we can talk about all the rest of it later?" "All the rest of it," I repeated. "We're tired," she said. Her voice had gone soft in the particular way it goes soft when she wants something. I have known that voice for 29 years. I know the difference between genuine exhaustion and strategic vulnerability. But my niece was asleep on my sister-in-law's shoulder with her hand curled up near her face, and that part was not strategic. That part was just a 3-year-old who didn't understand any of this. "Is she okay?" I asked, looking past my mother. My sister-in-law looked up. Her name is Priya, and she has always been quietly kind to me in a family that did not model that well. She nodded. She slept through most of the drive, she said. She's okay. I looked at my brother. He had put his phone in his pocket. He was looking at me in a way he didn't usually, not with the casual assumption I had seen my whole life, but with something more honest and a lot less comfortable. We shouldn't have sent that invoice, he said, quietly. Not staged. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. You shouldn't have. My father made a sound that might have been the beginning of a rebuttal. My mother put her hand on his arm. I thought about what Renata had said to me once, sitting on her porch after I had told her about the invoice. She had said, "The question isn't whether to let them back in. The question is what letting them in costs you, and whether you're paying that price because you choose to or because you were trained to." I had written that down. I still had it. I thought about the attorney I had called 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. Not to sue anyone, just to understand what it meant legally for someone to present you with a fictitious debt in a social context, whether it could be used as a first step towards something more formal. The attorney had listened, read my photos of the invoice, and said, "Keep the documentation. Don't let them establish any residential claim to your property, even temporarily. And understand you have no legal obligation here. Compassion is a choice. Make it consciously." I had thought about that phrase for months. Compassion is a choice. I made one. "You're not coming inside tonight," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me a little. My father's posture changed immediately. "Excuse me? I'm not doing this out of spite," I said. "I need you to hear that. I have thought about this family for the better part of this year, and I am not doing this from anger." "You'd send your own family away after a flood?" My mother's voice cracked on the last word. Real tears, I think. That didn't necessarily mean the rest of it was real. "I'd send my family somewhere safe," I said, which is not the same thing. I had made 2 phone calls before I opened the door. The first was to a hotel 4 miles away that had power restored and available rooms. I had held one with my credit card. The second was to Renata, who had a house with 3 guest rooms and had already told me 2 days ago to use her name if I needed to. I had not decided until this moment which option I would use and for whom. I looked at my sister-in-law. At my niece's small hand. "Priya," I said. "There is a hotel on Westheimer, the Courtyard. Room is already held under my name. Take my brother and the baby. The room is on me for 2 nights, no conditions. The address is in your texts. I sent it when you pulled in." Priya blinked. She looked at my brother. He was very still. "What about my mother?" started. "I have a second option for you and Dad," I said. I looked at them both. My father's jaw was set. My mother's hands were clasped in front of her. I stepped back and returned with a piece of paper I had printed. A shelter address. A church gymnasium 2 miles north that had been running flood relief intake since that afternoon, organized through the County Emergency Management Office. Hot meals, cots, a medical volunteer on site, charging stations. I had confirmed with my phone before I came to the door. I set it on the porch railing. "This is where you go tonight," I said. "It's safe, it's close, and they will take care of you." I called ahead. My father stared at it. He looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, not anger exactly, more like a man who has walked into a room he thought he knew and found all the furniture rearranged. "A shelter," he said. Like the word tasted wrong. "Yes," I said. "After everything we've given you." I reached into the pocket of my sweatpants and took out the envelope. The invoice. I had carried it in various pockets for 8 months, the way you carry a thing you haven't figured out what to do with yet. I held it up so he could see it in the porch light. "I know what you gave me," I said. "I have the itemized list." My mother made a sound like something small falling. I want to tell you honestly what I felt in that moment, because these stories usually skip this part. I did not feel power. I did not feel satisfaction the way you feel it when something goes right. What I felt was a tiredness, so old it had stopped feeling like a feeling, and had just become part of the weather inside me. I felt it, and I kept standing. "You tried to give me a bill for my own childhood," I said. "You knew about this place for months, and said nothing until you needed it. I am not your emergency contact. I am not your investment. I am your daughter, and that is something you will have to figure out how to earn back. And tonight is not that night. My father said something. I don't remember what it was. It was the kind of thing he said when he was out of leverage and hadn't yet figured out he was out of leverage. My mother pressed both hands to her face. My brother had stepped to the side. He was looking at the porch railing, at the shelter address on the paper. He picked it up. He read it. He folded it and put it in his pocket. I'll make sure they get there, he said quietly. I looked at him. And the invoice, he said. I told Mom, it was wrong. I should have said it louder. That one cost him something. I could see it cost him. I didn't rush to make it easier. I know, I said. He nodded. He touched my father's arm. My father resisted for one long breath, and then deflated in the specific way that pride deflates, when it runs out of fuel, not gracefully, not with dignity, just suddenly smaller. Priya moved toward the step with my niece still asleep on her shoulder. She paused beside me. Thank you for the room, she said. Low enough that only I heard. Take care of her, I said. She nodded. Then she was down the walk, and my brother was guiding my parents in the same direction, my mother with her hand over her mouth, my father with a duffel bag, and a posture that was still trying to look like a choice. I stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared. Then I went inside, locked the deadbolt, and sat down on my kitchen floor, because my legs had decided that was the right response. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the adrenaline to settle into something quieter and more complicated. Long enough to feel the specific grief of loving people who have spent years making themselves impossible to love without paying for it. Renata called at 12:45. I answered. They're at the shelter, she said. My cousin volunteers there on flood nights. She texted me. They checked in. I let out a breath. I had apparently been holding since about 11:30. And the baby? I said. Your brother sent me a photo from the hotel. She's asleep in the middle of a king bed with 3 pillows around her like a fortress. I laughed. It came out a little uneven, but it was real. You okay? Renata said. I don't know yet, I said. Ask me in a week. Fair, she said. I'll bring breakfast tomorrow. She did. Breakfast tacos from the place on Montrose, eaten on my porch in the thick August morning after a storm. The sky washed clean, and the streets starting to drain. We didn't talk about the night before very much. We talked about the power contracts that were going to keep our whole crew running for the next 6 weeks. We talked about the wildlife that always showed up on high ground after Houston floods, the displaced possums, the confused deer. We talked about Deb upstairs, who had texted to say she was fine and had she missed anything. The aftermath came slowly. The way things in my family always had not as one clear event, but as a series of smaller ones that accumulated meaning over time. My brother called 3 days after the storm. He did not open with an excuse. He said, I want to apologize for Thanksgiving. For the invoice. That was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and I went along with it because I didn't want the dinner to become a thing, and that was a coward's reason. He said some other things. I listened to all of them. I did not offer forgiveness on a timeline he could use to feel resolved. I told him I heard him, and I needed some time. He said, that's fair. And then he said, Priya thinks you're the most functional person in this family by about 3 generations. I laughed again, the uneven kind. My mother was harder. My mother was a woman who had built her entire identity around the performance of family. The photos, the holiday tables, the curated version of us that existed online, for people she hadn't seen since high school, and having that version broken open by reality, was not a process she could speed through. She sent careful, short texts for 2 weeks, not asking for anything, just thinking of you. And once. The shelter was fine. The people were kind. I hadn't expected that. I read that one several times. A month later, she asked if we could have coffee. Not a meal, not a family gathering, just coffee, 2 people. A place she'd never taken a photo at. I waited 4 days before saying yes. I chose the time and the location. A small place in the Heights with mismatched furniture, and no cell signal worth speaking of. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just less armored. She had her coffee in both hands, and she didn't try to frame the conversation before we started. She just looked at me for a moment and said, "I've been thinking about what you said. That you told me to leave, and I didn't listen because your father was certain." She paused. "I've been listening to your father's certainty for 30 years. I don't think that's served either of us particularly well." I didn't say anything. "I thought we were building a family," she said. "I think actually we were building a story about a family. And those are different things. You always knew they were different. I used to think that made you cold. Now I think it just made you honest." The coffee shop had an old ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. A dog was sleeping under the table next to us. Someone's laptop played a song I almost recognized. "I'm not ready to let you back in the way you want," I told her. "I need you to understand that, and not try to accelerate it." She nodded immediately. "No negotiation. No version of but how long." "I know," she said. "I won't lend money," I said. "I won't co-sign anything. I won't be the backup plan when the other options run out." "I know. And if we're going to actually rebuild something," I said, "it has to be something real, not something for the family photos." She looked down at her coffee. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet, but she didn't perform it. She just let it be there. "I think I've forgotten how to do real," she said. "I'd like to try to remember." That was not a resolution. Let me be clear about that. One conversation over coffee does not undo 29 years of a particular kind of parenting. My mother and I are not close the way I used to wish we were when I was young enough to believe wishing changed things. We have conversations now. We are working towards something that doesn't have a name yet, which is more honest than calling it fine when it isn't. My father is slower. He is the kind of man who processes shame by converting it into grievance, and there is still a lot of that conversion happening. He has taken on legitimate contract work for the first time in years. He does not call from blocked numbers anymore. He has not apologized the way my brother apologized, but he has become, incrementally, a person who can sit in the same room with the truth without immediately trying to redirect it. That is something. I'm not sure yet how much something. 6 weeks after the storm, I was on a job site downtown, 40 feet up in a scissor lift running conduit through a commercial ceiling, when I thought about the invoice. I thought about where it was, whether I still had it. It was photographed and emailed, and the physical copy was in the file folder, where I kept documentation of things I was not yet sure how to use. On my lunch break, I drove to a shredder service on a commercial block near the site, handed them the folder, watched it run through the machine. I want to explain what that moment felt like, because it is not what revenge stories usually tell you it feels like. It did not feel like victory. It did not feel like release, exactly. It felt like making a decision, that the 3 pages of itemized resentment had less claim on my future than the work I had in front of me. It felt like choosing what was allowed to take up space. The folder came out the other side in thin strips that fell into a gray bin. I went back to the job site. I finished the conduit run. I sent my supervisor a completed progress report before 5 o'clock. I drove home on I-10 and listened to music and felt, very slowly, something that was adjacent to peace. Not healed. I want to be careful with that word. Healing is not a state you arrive at. It is a practice, ugly and irregular, and some days you are more fluent in it than others. But I drove home to a place I had chosen, that I had paid for with money I had earned doing work I was genuinely good at, and nobody who lived inside those walls had ever once handed me an invoice for the right to exist there. Deb was on the upstairs porch when I pulled in. She waved. I waved back. Her plants were still alive, somehow, after a hurricane. She had zip-tied them to the railing before the storm. I had not thought to tell her to do that. She had just figured it out herself. I sat in the truck for a moment before going inside. The sky was doing the thing it does in Houston in late fall when the humidity finally breaks blue all the way down to the roofline, light hitting the city at an angle that makes it look briefly like somewhere someone planned. I thought about what Renata had said to me once. That the goal was not to become someone who didn't feel any of it. The goal was to become someone it couldn't be used against. I thought I might be getting there. If you had been in my position that night, standing at your own door in the dark, with your hand on the lock, and the people who raised you on the other side of the glass, tell me honestly, would you have opened it? Or would you have done the harder, more careful, more complicated thing? Found them somewhere safe to land, and let them learn, for the first time, that your home was built on your terms and not theirs. Because here's what no one tells you about that kind of story. The point was never the moment at the door. The point was every quiet decision that came before it. Every certification, every saved dollar, every conversation I chose not to have until I was ready that made it possible for me to stand there and not collapse. They didn't break me because I had already built something they couldn't reach. That's the only revenge worth anything. The kind that looks, from the outside, exactly like a life,